Bill Ferreira is the Executive Director of BuildForce Canada, which helps the construction industry manage its workforce requirements by providing reliable labor market information, tools, and resources. And he joins us today to do just that, to provide construction labor market information and set the stage for the conversations that follow. Bill, welcome to WorkForce 25.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me. So where are we right now? We have been seeing some growth in the labor force over the last year and a half. Fairly significant growth. We've also seen a little bit of employment growth. And as a result, what we've seen is employment not keeping pace with the level of growth in the labor force, and that's been driving up the unemployment rate a little. There has been some softness, particularly in the residential sector, which has created lower demand, investment demands than anticipated, in that it's as well is contributing to a slightly higher than average unemployment rate. Looking at the last year, the top bar there, which is the orange, or not orange, but light red, that is your labor force growth. And as you can see, it is it typically follows a pattern throughout the year, growing in the early part of the spring, then declining towards the end of the year, and then growing again. And as you can see, the labor force is actually above, in April, it is actually above the peak period last year. So well over 1.75 million individuals now in the construction labor force. The employment, again, does follow a similar sort of trend. And overall employment has been rising faster than coming out of the pandemic, faster than the capacity of the labor force to keep up. Those numbers now have inverted a little bit, whereas the labor force is now growing faster than overall employment. And again, 2024 did produce a little bit more softness on the employment side, again, in part due to declining demand for residential, in particular, new builds, which are down, particularly in some markets where there are concerns about capacity, as well as individual consumers being reluctant to jump back into the housing market at this time, waiting for interest rates to decline further. As you can see, employment is slightly above where it was last year at this time and in April, and that is in anticipation of a rise again in demand for both residential and non-residential construction. This is the latest data from Statistics Canada, and as you can see in the year-over-year data comparisons, the industry has added about just under 67,000 individuals to the construction labor force, whereas employment is up by just under 30,000 individuals compared to the same point last year. In terms of overall apprenticeship, and this is one of the success stories that we've seen in the last little while, there is obviously great concern about the retirement of the baby boom from the construction labor force and attracting young people into the industry, particularly into the skilled trades. And what we have seen is a significant increase in registrations. I've got here the comparisons between 2018 and 2023, and as you can see, these would be new registrations. The total new registrations back in 2018 was just about 53,400, and the rate at which, or the percentage share for women in the trades, was about 5.2%. What we see today, or in 2023, which is the latest data that we've been able to track, new registrations were up just under 72,000, and women now represent just slightly over 8% of the overall registrations into the industry, which is good news. In terms of attracting young people under 20, those numbers are more or less comparable to The numbers found back in 2018. The average apprentice begins their apprenticeship between the ages of 20 and 24. That's certainly the largest cohort of individuals, followed by the 25 to 29. And then we're into the under 20. And again, that's not really surprising. It's hard to get young people under the age of 20 to begin focusing on what they want to do with the rest of their lives. But we certainly have seen that number increase. And that is in part due to, I think, the efforts of the industry to try and promote at certainly the high school level careers in construction and generate interest among young people and youth in particular in careers in construction, which bodes well for trying to address some of our future labor force challenges. And this slide here certainly represents the challenge, which is we are seeing a significant shift in the overall population age distribution across the country. Is looking at 2024. If you look at that red bar, that represents individuals over the age of 65. And back in 2014, we were looking at about 16% of the country's population was 65 and older. By 2024, that number had risen to 19%. And by 2034, we anticipate that number will be about 21%. Now, when we look at the green bar, what we see there is that the actual share of youth, 15 to 24, has actually been in decline since 2014. It is stable until 2034, but the competition for younger workers is going to become very intense. All industries are facing the same demographic pressures, and as a result, while the construction industry has been somewhat successful in the last little while in drawing the interest of youth into careers in construction, there's no guarantee that as the competition intensifies to replace aging baby boomers that will be leaving the overall economy and entering into retirement, that we will continue to be successful. The plus has really been the core working age group, which is that yellow bar, has really been holding up, and we anticipate it will hold up in part because that has been driven by immigration, and we have been bringing high numbers of immigrants into the country over the past few years to help supplement the domestic labor force and fill any gaps that might exist in that labor force. And as a result, we haven't seen much of a change in the core working age group. Now, there have been some recent changes to immigration policy to bring those numbers down somewhat, although we do anticipate that they will remain adequate to continue to maintain a workforce that is adequate, certainly, to meet the needs of the overall economy in the short term. But given that there are fewer younger people coming into the workforce, that will place additional pressures on immigration as a supplement to help industries such as construction to supplement the overall training of our workforce through immigration. Looking ahead at where we see investment patterns going, and again, much of this data was collected pre the challenges, or certainly pre the U.S. election, and certainly the economic uncertainty that has been introduced in the last little while related to tariffs. But as we see here, non-residential activity had been on the rise and is expected to continue to carry forward at least until about 27, 28, at which point then it begins to decline somewhat and then rises again after 2030, right through to the end of the forecast period. On the residential side, which is your red line, what we're seeing there is, again, a significant decline from the peak construction that we saw in 2021. We believe certainly 2024, and again, this isn't true of all markets, but 2024 will be was essentially the low point. And from this point forward, beginning roughly in 2025, we begin to see a recovery in demand for residential construction. In 2025, we're not seeing much growth. Essentially, we're expecting between 24-25 growth to be flat, whereas non-residential construction increased by about, or investment to increase by about 1%. But then moving out to between 25 and 29, residential, it rises by about 8.4%, whereas non-residential, with, again, many of the projects that we are currently tracking beginning to approach completion, we don't see a lot of growth on that front, in fact, just under 1%. But overall, looking out over our entire forecast, we see residential investment rising by about 15.3% and non-residential investment rising by about 1.6%. And in terms of what this means to the labor force, the big challenge is going to be keeping pace with retirements. We have in the 34 trades and occupations that we currently track, and those are the on-site professions that are critical in the construction industry. We had about 1.29 million individuals working in the construction industry in 2024 in those 34 trades and occupations. We expect that the labor force will need to rise to about 1.4 just to keep pace with overall construction demands. That means we're going to need to find an additional 111,000 individuals to join the construction workforce over the next 10 years. When we take into account the 268,000 individuals that we anticipate will retire over that period, the industry will need to hire an additional 380,000 individuals just to keep pace with demands and offset any declines in the labor force related to retirements. We do anticipate we will be able to draw into the industry about 272,000 new entrants, but that still leaves us with a gap of about 108,000 individuals that will either need to be brought in from other industries in particular with the same skill sets that the construction industry demands, or through heightened recruitment, or we're going to have to bring in these individuals from outside the country to help supplement our ongoing domestic training efforts. So in terms of our forecast outlook, in some of the key messages are really that the current economic uncertainty may impact investment demands. Although most of the work that we are tracking in terms of major projects, a lot of them are being funded by public sector. These are public sector investments into healthcare, education, public transit, and then a lot of infrastructure work ongoing across the country. That work is unlikely to be affected by tariffs as much as some of the major private sector investments that we were also tracking. And we've started to hear a little bit about this, such as Honda suspending their project to invest about $15 billion into the retooling of their facilities here in Canada. We've also heard that Dow has put a pause on moving forward with its project in Alberta. Those are a couple that we have been tracking. There are some others in other parts of the country. And again, much of this is related to the uncertainty right now related to tariffs. And until we get some greater clarity from the United States as to what the overall rules will be in terms of being able to export into that market, we're likely to see some of that private sector investment potentially paused. Unlikely it'll be canceled, but certainly paused in the near term until there's some greater clarity around what is actually happening. In terms of housing, we do still see strong demand out there for housing, particularly among young people. So we are expecting to see a bit of a rebound. And that should carry throughout most of the forecast period. in most markets across the country. There are some challenges in places like Toronto, in the Greater Toronto area, that are looking at some very challenging conditions right now, in part due to excess inventory of units and additional units coming to market over the next 18 months. Labor force has been growing, which is a positive, in part because of the efforts of industry to try and promote careers in construction, not only to youth, but to individuals that traditionally haven't been attracted to construction or have been underrepresented in construction. And that is, again, in combination with many of the promotional programs that governments themselves have launched, not only provincial governments, but federal governments, as well as some of the support programs that are in place, that the federal government put in place, certainly to try and create conditions whereby employers could take on first-year apprentices through a form of wage subsidy, particularly for individuals from underrepresented groups or equity-deserving groups. The last key message really is one about competition for younger workers, and this is really related to our demographics. All industries are facing the same demographic challenges that construction is facing, and all industries will be competing for that smaller pool of younger workers that will be available to enter the labor force over the next 10 years. And that really is going to create intense pressure to attract those individuals into construction. And I guess the key message really is that this is not a time to let up. The industry is going to have to remain quite active in promoting careers in construction domestically to underrepresented groups as well as youth to ensure that we can meet our future labor force demands. That being said, we will also be dependent on immigrants to help supplement that domestic workforce recruitment. And in part, that requires some changes to government policy to ensure that we are bringing in the right individuals with the skill sets that the construction industry needs to help fill any gaps that might exist as a result of, again, this intensified pressure for the recruiting of younger workers. And with that, I think I've taken up my 20 minutes, and I will turn it back to you, Adam.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. That's a ton of information, great information. This is one of the reasons why I love having you do presentations like this, because you cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And I feel like I drink from a fire hose a bit when you're hitting us with the numbers. But the things that really stood out to me are things like, we're trying to forecast during times of uncertainty. So there will be a little bit of adjustment for sure, I would expect, between what happens with the US as well as what happens with the federal aim to get into the housing market as well. So those will be yet to be seen influences, I'm sure.